Mason Lindroth is an interesting artist. He focuses primarily on the use of claymation alongside liberal digital editing to create a fantastic art style of surreal figures and environments. It's almost guaranteed that anyone who recognizes this name will know him from one game series he made, Hylics. That's where I first learned about him, and I'm glad because Hylics was a treat almost entirely because of the art. It got me to dig around his history and see what else he's done. I found out he actually has a pretty decent catalog of prior games. Granted, all of his games combined still don't compare to the scope Hylics ended up having, and this is primarily because each and every game prior to Hylics was done for Ludum Dare Game Jam, meaning that almost everything had roughly 3 days of work put into it. I decided to take a quick look through his backlog to see how much he's improved since some of the games date all the way back to 2012, which is still 3 years off from the first Hylics. It should be noted that if anyone wants to play any of these games, you will have to go and download BlueMaxima's Flashpoint. All of these games were made in Flash, and the places hosting them were taken down with the death of Flash. However, the game's preservation project has all of his prior works on there. Just make sure you download the light version because the ultimate version is definitely a little too ultimate. So, onto the first of these games, Asmosnos, which is made in 2012 for Ludum Dare 25. This game involves you being some kind of laboratory-born individual on a floating meteor fortress, who is probably the angriest looking character I've ever seen. I mean, just look at that strut. You're woken up by your master, who is a giant brain, and you're ordered to locate the Doomsday device to destroy the world. Simple plot for an even simpler game. This is more of an art gallery than it is a game, really. You just go across the overworld to all of the various landmarks and just see the sights. It's awfully reminiscent of Zelda 2 in the way you go from the overworld to the side-scrolling landmarks. Hell, even the one house you see is set up exactly like Zelda 2. So the first landmark you see is this very house, and all there really is to do is dance. He tells you about the dance button, you dance with him a bit, and that's it. Moving on, you'll encounter an open field with possibly some omnipotent being showing off his powers of fireworks. After that is a simple field where you can just watch some of the beautiful wildlife frolicking through the meadow. Majestic. After that, you can visit an actual art gallery within this art gallery, and it's probably the longest building of them all, and is the only part of the game that actually has any kind of platforming. All it does is serve as a way to get out of the building, since apparently there's no door on the ground floor. And at that point, you've pretty much seen every site, so you just gotta get to the end. In this final area, you're greeted with an empty chair with a slowly fading figure, this weird finger god, who tells you he's been watching you and fears that the world might come to an end soon. So, you apparently get teleported to some random unmarked island, where you find the Doomsday device. You pull it, and, well, there you go, the world's blown up. In the end, this game will wrap up in about 2 to 3 minutes, and it's not really a bad way to spend those few minutes, honestly. Especially just to watch this dude grumpily walk through everything. The next game is, and I'm totally gonna butcher this because I think it's French and I don't care, Journaliere. Made in 2013 for something called the No Future contest, where it won the Jury Award. Which, as far as I can tell, is a very French game jam thing. And if I'm looking at the information right, the theme for this was Work It. This game is a step up from Asmosnos, but it's still the same general concept. The biggest addition is involving more world interactivity, and it's just a little bit longer. You can interact with the TV in your house to watch one of 3 shows. You can go to this arcade and play a short platformer, which is actually kind of cool because it provides a few different paths you can take to complete it. The next stop is a house in the middle of nowhere with a dead body in front of it. Going inside, you'll find it's some cultist shack, and they appear to have performed some ritual. Interacting with the ritual circle teleports you to another dimension, where you see a familiar face show up. However, this time around he's significantly more creepy and animated. Once you wait around long enough, you'll be teleported to this altar across the map, which you previously couldn't do anything with. After that, you can visit the museum, which is shorter this time around, but at the very end they tell you that you can dance, and if you dance, everyone in the room will join you. Keep an eye out for this later, because this guy seems to really like adding dancing to his games. After that, the only real stop left is the office, which includes a more detailed close-up perspective as you walk up to your chair and begin your workday. But immediately after, everyone suddenly turns into slime on the spot, prompting you to leave. Going out the same door instead takes you to the roof of the building where nothing really happens, but if you try to leave, you get a scene of your character morphing into a melted clay mass and floating off, similar to the fates of the others. Given the name of this game is the word daily in French, if my Google Translate is anything to believe, it seems like it was intended to be some kind of commentary on the monotony of office work. Either way, it's another small but neat game with a little more to it this time. It ran me about 10 minutes, and half of that was just on the arcade, and unlike the first game, which at least had some music, even if it was like a 5-second loop, this game has no sound whatsoever. The third game is Almost Fluid Plantain, which is, as Mason himself puts it, a last-minute effort that was done for Ludum Dare 27 in 2013. The theme for this one was 10 minutes, so you can expect something to be very bare bones. It's pretty much just an interactive noisemaker. Every letter key on the keyboard makes a different sound from one of the bandmates. The top row controls the guitar player, the middle row controls the singer, and the bottom row controls the keyboard player. You just mash your keyboard for 30 seconds, and that's the game. Definitely not the most interesting of the batch, but keep this one in the back of your head, along with all the other games. Mason doesn't seem to like leaving ideas alone, no matter how small. Now for the next game, Weird Egg and Crushing Finger. This one I actually enjoyed quite a bit. It's probably the most interactive these games have been so far, even if it can still be pretty hands-off. You start with an egg that you have to break open. This will create a weird blob that'll kind of just walk around and slowly evolve into a human. Said human will then start up a house, which creates more humans. As time goes on, more houses spring up and the previous houses will evolve. The second tier of people will have pitchforks and will kill the first tier on contact. Given enough time, they'll eventually evolve into the third tier, which are a bunch of shamans that, upon contact with anyone out of the second or the first tier, they'll revert them back to the blob phase, where they'll eventually evolve into the first tier of humans. They'll also interact with the souls dropped by anyone who dies, and send those souls into the night sky to become stars. If you do this enough, the theme will eventually have a rock layer added onto it, and everyone will start dancing for a fair bit. But all good things must end as the island starts being inhabited by death skulls. You can't kill them, you can only push them around to keep them away from the humans, or push them into humans to kill themselves. These skulls will eventually level up as they kill enough humans, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't really do anything except change their visuals. However, unlike the humans, there's really no limit to these guys. I kept my game running for about 20 minutes just to see what would happen, and I kind of ended up exterminating all life as it sprang up in an endless cycle of pain, because every square inch of this land was kind of filled up with the death skulls. But one of the coolest parts of this game is that we're kind of starting to see where the art style for Hylics is beginning to flourish here, as the death skulls are pretty much identical to the ones that ended up appearing in Hylics. Overall, I think this game would have been awesome back like 15 years ago when screensavers were a thing, and this made me realize I might have to explain what a screensaver is, because some of the people who stumble into this video might be a bit too zoomer to remember them. Basically, when we were using these old-ass CRT monitors, there was an issue with images being burnt into the screen if they stayed on too long. To fix this, they made computers display animated wallpapers over your whole screen. So there ended up being a huge market for really neat animations for when your computer goes into sleep mode. I really would have loved to see the development and destruction of this basic civilization as a screensaver way back then, if it was even possible to have something like this. After that, we have Beachcomber, which was made for Ludum Dare 29 in 2014, and it involves you, well, combing a beach. You just walk around with a metal detector, and once it detects something, you just dig it up by spamming left click, and that's it. There's only 3 things you can find, and they seem to only show up in a specific order, with only 2 really needed to finish this game. First is some random coins, the second is a rubber tube that flattens out to form a raft, which I actually thought was a really clever use of his clay art style, watching this flat piece of clay just inflate into the shape of a raft. Once you got the raft, you can use it to go to an island, which has a bar full of people, interact with the jukebox, everyone dances, again, and that's it. But if you go for the third item, you'll eventually dig up an eye. Scratch it once and it opens, and if you keep scratching it, you'll just tear it apart and find an entrance to some weird area. This triggers some giant hand to break through the ground and loom over you. If you enter, you'll find yourself inside a weird control center surrounded by clay meat, which is gonna be a recurring theme with his games going forward. Activating this allows you to control the giant fuck-off monstrosity and rampage to the city. Once you've destroyed all the buildings, you can go back to sleep and that's it. The second ending is definitely pretty different from the first one, and I actually really enjoyed that. Once again, this game is also very short, coming in about 5 minutes. Then we have Lullaby, which was made for Ludum Dare 30 in 2014, drawing ever closer to the release date of Hylics in 2015. You can tell by this point that Mason really knows how he wants to make his games look, as this is the closest looking and sounding to Hylics so far. Hell, the music in this game is actually used in Hylics as well. This game revolves around you just channel surfing and interacting with whatever it is that's going on, even if you can, because some channels don't really have any interactions whatsoever. The first channel shows you the primary gameplay that you're going to be doing. This just involves you pushing a ball through some various obstacles into a hole at the end. Overall, it's not that great because the ball is really finicky and sometimes you just can't get it unstuck if it runs into a corner. Thankfully, you don't really have to do any of this at all. As far as I can tell, there's no reward, nothing happens when you actually complete the level other than, congratulations, you did it. In order to beat the game, you just have to get to the end and then just wiggle your knob back and forth until the knob breaks and hey, that's the ending. And other than the channels which have you pushing the ball around, other channels will have extremely minor interactions or none at all. In some cases, it'll just be a nose that you can wiggle around, or an animation of someone running and you can just change the curvature of the roads. Just very small stuff like that. As far as it being a game goes, I really didn't like it just because the main thing of pushing a ball around kinda sucked, and considering I did all the ball stages, I kind of hate myself. But honestly, the art and music were freaking fantastic here. This is pretty much that hit of surreal weird shit that I come to this guy for. Mossnaso was developed in 2014 for Ludum Dare 31. The title for this game is actually an anagram of the first title we covered. Not even titles are safe from Mason bringing back previous ideas, and this is by far the most video game entry up to this point. There is still plenty of art to look at, but you now have a very specific goal and a failure state. Your goal is in 3 stages. You gotta kill 2 bosses, kill enough enemies to power the portal, and get back to that room for the final area. And you also gotta do this while having limited health and ammo. There's only one room in the game that can restore your health and ammo, so you gotta be careful, because if you're too low on health, it can kinda be a huge pain in the ass to get back. And since you could do the first 2 objectives in any order, I usually went for the bosses first, since they can be kind of the biggest pains in the asses, and then just went to the healing room and just farmed the enemies outside until the end. After that, I'd go to the end and just immediately die. And that's the game. Yeah, the final area is a bit weird. You just walk around in this area for a bit, see this kind of horrifying monstrosity once you realize what you're looking at, deal some damage, and it'll just one-shot you. At first I thought I did something wrong and that this was an actual boss fight since it didn't really do anything while I was wailing on it, so I ended up playing the game over again just to make sure. And yeah, that's just what happens, you die and that's it. Overall, if you do everything in one go, the game will take you about 5 minutes. For me, it took me about 30-35 minutes just because I kind of kept dying. And while it was mildly frustrating with the limited health, it was okay. Really, the biggest problem I had with this game is the sound. It seems like in lieu of having actual music, they tried to make your footsteps and shots make randomly pitched sounds at random intervals. At first I thought this was kind of a neat effect, until about 30 seconds later when this is just all I heard for the next 30 minutes, and I kind of wanted to blow my brains out. Keeping up the pace of fleshing these games out more, we have Melty. Made for Ludum Dare 32 in 2015, this game sets out to actually try something really interesting while maintaining the highly refined art style Mason has been working on over the last few years. This is a platformer where you have 2 abilities that alternate every time you hit the left mouse button. One creates a trail of balls that act as solid objects for you to stand on or block things with, and the other is an acid projectile that melts whatever it hits and sends out a cluster of 3 other acid balls to other objects around. And when I say you can melt whatever, I really mean it. The entire level can be reduced to nothing if you can somehow not fall into the always present lava while doing so. And that last fact is mostly because the controls are so goddamn slippery you'll just fall off of every ledge you see. So the first level is pretty standard and doesn't really do anything special other than follow the same kind of level design where there's more often than not multiple ways you can go through a level, not counting actually going through the level. And of the 3 levels, I found this one to be the hardest because of how cramped it is and because the acid clusters are kind of unpredictable, so you could end up just knocking out the object under your feet and you fall in the lava and have to restart again. The second level is much easier because the gimmick of this is just to dig down, and because it's so wide, you can pretty much avoid most enemies you see, so you'll really just be using the acid ball. Which kinda makes me wish that acid wasn't on an alternate attack pattern with the platform balls, because it just gets really annoying having to double click just to do anything in this stage. But it's over fairly quickly because you can do this in about 2 minutes just by going straight down to the end. And the last mission is actually on the more interesting side. This is because there's a lot of stretches of completely empty space. This is kind of framed like a spaceship hijacking thing. First, you start off on your own little ship and have to bridge your way across this huge empty gap to a few floating structures. From there, you finally reach this one last large area that is supposed to be some kind of large space base, as you try and avoid a lot of enemies who are shooting projectiles at you. My strategy for this is to get to the lowest area of this place that's just full of a bunch of ground enemies, try and dig my way through, push the enemies into the lava, and make it to the end. And the ending consists of a little thank you screen that you can melt away until you reach the bottom, and that's it. This is one game I actually kind of want to see improved, because I think it's a neat idea, especially with Mason's platforming level design, with it being very spread out and multi-layered. I actually thought that as a tech demo, this was pretty good overall. It gives you a good taste of the extremes of this game. The first level was pretty balanced with using the platforms and the acid. The second level relied primarily on the acid, while the last level relied primarily on the platforms in order to just get anywhere in that stage. So there was definitely some experimentation done, and I'd really like to see them expand on that further. Really the biggest problem it had was, honestly, the controls kind of sucked. But for a game that only took you 30 minutes to finish, all those deaths and frustration included, it wasn't so bad. And now we're down to the last full game that we would see before Hylics release. Fishbowl, that was made for Ludum Dare 33 in 2015. This one is another platformer and has a similar destruction mechanic to Melter, but with a little less jank to it. Still plenty of jank, but just a little bit less. So you play as this hulked out monster cat thing who has 2 attacks. A long tongue swipe, and crying. When you use the swipe attack on your tears, they will also catch on fire, and any white blocks you hit should catch on fire and disappear. This can admittedly take a few tries. Like Melter, it only has 3 levels, with the goal being some object you have to collect. The first level is very straightforward, where you pretty much walk right, avoid a few obstacles, and get to the end. The second is significantly more vertical and winds around a lot, but it's also kind of an asshole for the fact that the level end is down this hole that you have to burn instead of going past it. If you do end up going past this hole, there's still plenty of enemies everywhere and there's a lot more to this level, so it made me think, oh, there's just more going on over here. But then I ended up falling into an abyss that wasn't an instant kill and had to restart the entire game. Not after seeing what else is after this place. And there was just so much more to this level, even though halfway through you just get to the end, and that's the only way to complete it as far as I can tell. It was very weird. And the last level goes back to being a bit more standard. You progress down into this castle while avoiding a few enemies, and it's done in a few minutes, honestly. Once you get all 3 fishbowls, you get this scene where you rocket off into space, and then go back to the title screen. This was probably the least interesting of these games on display, because the levels weren't as complex, save for the second level, and overall it was a bit visually busy without the same kind of flair the other games had. Plus it kind of felt like a step down with it going back to the drawn enemies rather than the claymation style enemies, but it's also 10 minutes long, so it really wasn't that bad in the end. And that's probably a theme you've noticed by this point. A lot of the games are okay, maybe not that great in reality, but they're so short that it's like it's an okay enough bite-sized experience. But this isn't the end, as there's technically one more game that came out before Hylics. Admittedly, it's barely worth mentioning because there's even less to it than Almost Fluid Plantain. Especially after we had 3 games in a row that were pretty full experiences, all things considered. This is basically a Mario Paint type program where you just place down random stickers, have vague control over them, and that's it. The music is actually cool though, which is something I hadn't touched upon yet. What you're listening to now is not the music that any of these games have had, this is the music from Hylics 2. I normally like picking music from whatever game I'm showing, but, well, let's just say you have to have a very specific kind of taste to like the soundtracks done by Mason Lindroth. I don't know if he's an amateur composer who's just smart enough to mask his slightly catchy songs under incoherent chaos, or if he's really talented and that's why these songs of sheer nonsense kind of work sometimes. Like, here's a few examples. And frankly, I like a lot of the tracks that he does. I understand that they are completely insane, but I love them regardless. So now that we got through all the pre-Hylics games that I can get my hands on, I'd like to shed some light onto 2 more. These were games that appeared to be early in Mason's time making games and were taken down around 2019 by Mason himself. It's not clear why, but thankfully footage of one of them has resurfaced and we get to see the entire game. This one is called Somsnosa, and it came out a little bit before Asmosnos. Yeah, there was actually a 3rd game that was an anagram for Asmosnos. The more interesting thing about this game is how similar to the original Hylics this game was, but you could definitely see the massive jump in quality from this to his later games. The second one I can't find any footage of other than this one image on a French site that hosted the No Future contest that Mason also signed up for. It says the game was from 2013, making it one of his earlier works alongside Asmosnos and Somsnosa, which is honestly a shame. Regardless of the reason he decided to pull the game from any public download, I definitely stand by the preservation of games whenever possible. This project made me realize that more than ever. Prior to this, I was always for it, because there's just so much cool shit that one day might disappear if we don't take care of it. But I never really had my heart into the idea, because I can't say I ever had to use it. Well, you should have seen my face when I planned to do this project of covering all of Mason's pre-Hylics games, only to find out that they all ran on the now defunct Flash, and that there was no way of playing any of them except for 2 if I wanted to install some plugins. But I ended up finding out that the amazing project BlueMaxima Flashpoint, which has managed to preserve over 70,000 Flash games and animations from disappearing forever. Even if some of these games and animations may not be of the highest quality, or arguably even good, they still speak volumes for what was happening at the time in terms of the kind of humor that was big, as well as giving us an idea on the progress some of these artists have made over the years, if they are even still active. But enough of that little soapbox. Hopefully this was interesting, since I did fly through these games really fast. There admittedly wasn't too much to go over for each individual game. It was more about showing off the art and the weird ideas this guy's had, as well as the progress that he's made over the roughly 3 or 4 years worth of games that I covered. Up next, however, we're finally getting to the game that made Mason Lindroth significantly more well known. And hopefully this one won't take 2 goddamn months for a literally nothing video.